Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time we're going to be diving into Positioning, the Battle for Your Mind. It was written by the marketing legends Ries and Trout.
And it's a book that's had a huge impact on the field of marketing. So many people have read it and taken its ideas to heart.
It first came out in 1981, but even decades later we're still talking about it. So we really want to unpack why.
What's really fascinating to me is how Al and Jack really nailed it. They nailed this whole problem of information overload way back in 1981. I mean, think about it.
Right. It's like our brains were already under siege.
Exactly.
They threw out some stats in the book, and they would make your head spin.
Like, what kinds of stats are we talking about?
Like something like 30,000 new books were being published every year, even back then.
Wow.
And that's not even counting newspapers, TV, radio.
Right.
And think about it.
This was before.
This was before the internet. Smartphones, social media. It's crazy to think about.
Yeah, the information landscape today, it's so much more crowded. So in a way, their insights are even more important now than they were then.
So with all this information overload, how do we even begin to cut through the noise?
Right.
And that is where this big idea of positioning comes in.
Exactly. Positioning. It's not about manipulating people or tricking them. It's really about understanding how the mind actually works.
Oh, okay.
And then strategically placing your product or service, even yourself, really, in the mind of your target audience.
So let's break that down a bit. So you're saying it's not about changing the product itself,
Yeah.
but about shaping how people perceive it.
You got it. Think of it like creating a mental shortcut. When someone needs a certain type of product or service, what's the brand that pops into their head first? That's the power of positioning.
Okay, I'm starting to see the light here.
Good.
So instead of trying to shout louder than everyone else, you need to be more strategic,
Yeah.
more targeted. You need to understand what's already in the consumer's mind, and then position yourself accordingly.
Exactly. And you know, a key principle here is the power of being first.
Oh, interesting.
Al and Jack have this great example in the book. They ask, who was the first person to fly solo across the Atlantic?
Oh, I know this one. Charles Lindbergh.
That's right. But who was second? Most people have no idea.
Yeah, I know it.
And that just illustrates their point perfectly. Being first in someone's mind is incredibly powerful.
Wow.
It's much easier to be remembered than it is to try and dislodge someone who's already there.
So how do you become first, especially in a marketplace that's so crowded?
Well, it's not always about literally being the first to market. It's about being the first to own a really clear, concise, and compelling position in the mind of your target audience.
Okay, so it's about perception.
Exactly.
They give some great examples of the book, like Kodak with photography, IBM with computers, Xerox with copiers.
Right. And they all became synonymous with their categories because they were the first to establish a strong, distinct position.
So they essentially owned that space in the consumer's mind. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But what happens when a brand that was once really successful starts to struggle?
That's a great question. And Al and Jack actually identify a really common pitfall that companies fall into. They call it the FWMTS trap.
The FWMTS trap.
Yeah, it stands for forget what made them successful.
Okay, I am intrigued. Tell me more about this FWMTS trap.
All right, so companies fall into this trap. When they lose sight of that core positioning, that brought them their initial success.
They forget what made them special in the first place.
Exactly. They start chasing trends, trying to be everything to everyone.
Oh, I see.
And they end up diluting their message and confusing their audience.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you have any examples that really bring this to life?
Yeah, they use Avis, the car rental company. They had a brilliant campaign back in the day where they positioned themselves as number 2.
I remember them.
They were leveraging the existing perception of Hertz as the leader.
Right.
And it worked incredibly well.
Yeah, their slogan was, "We try harder." It really resonated with people.
It did. But then they fell into that FWMTS trap. They started running ads claiming to be number 1, but it just fell flat.
Why do you think that was?
Well, it just contradicted their established positioning, and consumers just didn't buy it.
So they were trying to be something they weren't.
Exactly.
So the lesson here is once you've found a winning position, stick with it.
Right.
Don't get distracted by trying to be something you're not. Focus on what makes you unique.
Absolutely.
And hammer that message home consistently.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And sometimes, that means taking a bold approach, an unconventional approach.
Like what?
Al and Jack talk about this idea of the Uncola strategy.
The Uncola strategy, what is that?
It's where a brand positions itself against the dominant player in the category.
Oh, interesting.
The classic example is 7-Up. They were getting crushed by Coke and Pepsi in the cola wars, so they very cleverly positioned themselves as the Uncola, like a refreshing alternative.
Oh, that's smart.
Right.
By defining themselves against these giants, they carved out their own unique space.
That's dead.
So they kind of flipped the script on its head.
Exactly.
Okay, that's super interesting. But I can imagine that this strategy could be a little bit tricky. You have to be very clear about what you are, not just what you're not.
Absolutely. You can't just be the anti-something. You have to offer a genuine and compelling alternative.
I see. You have to stand for something.
Exactly.
This is all so insightful. It's really making me think differently about how brands communicate and how we as consumers perceive them. What else can we learn from Al and Jack about cutting through the noise and making a lasting impression?
Well, they emphasize this really critical importance of simplicity and focus in a world that's just overflowing with information. You can't afford to be complicated or vague. You have to be crystal clear and get straight to the point.
So it's like a laser beam,
Yes.
not a floodlight.
Exactly. And they have this concept of owning a word in the customer's mind.
Oh.
They use Volvo as an example. What's the first word that comes to mind when you think of Volvo?
Safety, for sure.
Exactly.
It's almost automatic.
Right. BMW owns driving. FedEx owns overnight. Crest owns cavity prevention.
Oh, that's interesting.
They've each effectively claimed a word or a concept in the minds of consumers.
So it's like they become a shortcut for decision-making. So when you need something specific, boom, that brand just pops up. That
Exactly.
makes perfect sense.
And this is where a lot of companies kind of stumble. They try to be too many things to too many people.
Right.
They dilute their message, and they end up losing their impact.
So focus is key.
Focus is key.
Find your unique selling proposition, your one word, and own it.
Exactly.
Sounds simple enough, but I bet it's a lot harder than it looks.
Oh, it definitely takes discipline. Al and Jack even dedicate a whole chapter to this. They call it the line extension trap.
The line extension trap, what's that?
So it's this really tempting thing. You have a successful product, right? And you think, let's put that name on everything.
Oh yeah, I can see how that would be tempting.
But instead of strengthening the original brand, it can actually weaken it.
Really?
Yeah, they use the example of Miller Lite.
Oh yeah, Miller Lite was huge.
It was.
So what happened?
They had this massive success with their light beer,
Right.
but then they started slapping the light name on everything. Miller Genuine Draft Light, Miller Ice Light. It just became meaningless.
Interesting. So the Light brand lost its meaning.
It did.
So the lesson here is, don't mess with a winning formula. If you have a successful brand, protect it.
Protect it.
Don't dilute it by trying to be everything to everyone.
Exactly.
And we've been talking a lot about positioning as this kind of defensive strategy, like protecting your turf.
Right.
But it can also be offensive, right?
It's absolutely. It can be a powerful offensive tool, too.
I don't know more about that.
You can actually use it to reposition your competitors.
Oh, this sounds juicy.
It is. So imagine your Scope mouthwash,
Okay.
and you're going up against Listerine.
The big dog.
Right. Which is known for its, shall we say, intense flavor?
Yeah, it's a bit strong.
Scope saw an opportunity there.
How so?
Well, they turned Listerine's strength into a weakness by focusing on that harsh taste
I see.
and then positioning themselves as the pleasant-tasting alternative.
Ah, that's clever.
Right.
So they repositioned Listerine in the minds of consumers
Uh-huh.
and opened up a space for themselves.
Exactly.
Like a judo move.
Yeah.
Using your opponent's weight against them.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about being first, the FWMTS trap, the Uncola strategy, simplicity and focus. But we haven't talked about names yet. Those have to be important for positioning, right?
Absolutely. The name is so important. It's the first point of contact. The initial impression,
Right.
a strong, memorable name, is a huge asset.
I can imagine.
But a weak or confusing name can be a major liability.
So what makes a good name in the context of positioning?
Al and Jack say that names should be easy to remember, easy to pronounce, and relevant to your positioning.
So it should make sense.
Exactly. And they warn against falling into this no-name trap,
The no-name trap.
where companies shy away from distinctive names.
Yeah. So like calling a product the Thingamajig 3000 or something like that?
Exactly. Like, who's going to remember that?
Not me.
They have this great analogy. They say the human mind operates like an ear, not an eye.
Oh, interesting.
So a name has to sound right.
That makes sense. And of course, they bring up the line extension trap again here.
They do.
Using the same name for a bunch of different products can dilute the brand and confuse consumers.
Right. Think back to Miller Lite.
Oh yeah, it's a strong name, but overused to the point where it lost all meaning.
Exactly.
So choose your names carefully, folks.
Choose them carefully. They can make or break your brand.
What else did Al and Jack have to say about names?
Well, they argued that good names should be short, simple, and suggestive of the product's benefits,
Yep.
and also unique. They should stand out from the competition.
Do you have any examples that come to mind?
Yeah, think about names like Apple, Google, or Amazon.
Oh,
They're short, memorable, and they roll off the tongue easily.
And they're all giants now. Makes you wonder if the name played a part in their success.
It's hard to say for sure, but a strong name definitely gives you a head start.
That's for sure. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the importance of being first, the FWMTS trap, the Uncola strategy, simplicity and focus, the power of names. But how do all these pieces fit together? Is there a way to put all of this into practice?
That's the brilliant thing about this book. Al and Jack actually give us a framework,
Oh, nice.
a 6-step positioning game plan
Good plan.
that anyone can use to develop a winning strategy.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's hear about this game plan.
All right, so step 1, it's all about self-awareness, understanding your current positioning.
So where you stand right now?
Exactly. Where do you stand in the minds of your target audience? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses?
Before you can even chart a course, you need to know where you are on the map.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
Step 2 is defining your desired position. Where do you want to be? What's that one word you want to own in the minds of your customers?
So figure out your destination.
Exactly. Step 3 is all about identifying your competition.
Oh.
Who are you up against? What are their strengths and weaknesses?
So it's not enough to just know your own game. You need to know your opponent's game, too.
You got it. Step 4 is about being realistic about resources.
Those resources, okay.
Do you have the budget, the
Yeah.
talent, the infrastructure to actually achieve your positioning goals?
So it's one thing to have big dreams, but you need to make sure that you can actually make them happen.
Right. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew.
Very true.
Step 5 is all about commitment.
Commitment.
Can you stick to your strategy over the long haul?
Oh, so it's not a quick fix.
It's not. Positioning is a long-term game.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. And finally, step 6. It's the gut check.
The gut check.
Yeah, does your positioning fit? Is your message authentic and believable?
Oh, that's important.
It is, because people can spot a phony a mile away.
Right.
Your positioning needs to align with who you really are, or it will eventually crumble.
So be yourself. Be genuine. And be consistent.
Exactly. You got it.
Wow, this 6-step game plan. That's incredibly helpful. It's like a roadmap.
It is.
For building a winning strategy, it makes you think strategically about your place in the world and how you want to be perceived.
And you know what's really cool about it?
What's that?
It's not just for businesses.
Oh, really?
You can apply these principles to any area of life where you're trying to make an impact.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Give me some examples.
Okay, well, think about a job interview.
Okay.
You're essentially trying to position yourself as the ideal candidate in the mind of the interviewer.
Oh, I see.
You want to highlight your unique skills, your experiences, and demonstrate why you're the best fit for the role.
So even without realizing it, I'm already using the principles of positioning.
You are?
It's like I'm trying to own the word perfect candidate in the interviewer's mind. That's fascinating.
Or think about building your personal brand, whether you're an artist, a writer, an entrepreneur, or just someone who wants to make a difference. You need to think about how you're positioning yourself, both online and offline.
Yeah, that's so true.
Right.
We're all constantly positioning ourselves, whether we realize it or not.
We are.
So it makes sense to be more intentional about it.
Exactly.
And the key is to be authentic
Right.
and genuine. Your positioning needs to align with your values and who you really are.
Otherwise, people will see right through it.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. It's really shifted my perspective on marketing, on communication, even on how I present myself to the world. So as we wrap up here, what's one final thought that you can leave our listeners with?
Yeah.
Something that will really stick with them and encourage them to explore these ideas further.
Okay, well, here's something to ponder. In today's digital age, where everyone has a platform and attention spans are shrinking, what does it even mean to own a position?
That's a good question.
Is it even still possible to cut through the noise and make a lasting impression? And if so, how do we do it? That's a question we all need to be grappling with.
Yeah, that's a powerful question. It really makes you think about the challenges and opportunities of positioning yourself in a world that's constantly evolving.
And that's what Al and Jack were all about, challenging conventional thinking and encouraging us to find new and innovative ways to connect with our audiences.
Well, on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into Positioning, the Battle for Your Mind. This book is a true classic for a reason, and we highly encourage you to check it out. It's full of timeless wisdom that can help you navigate the complexities of the modern world and achieve greater success in all areas of your life. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.